Good morning. Uh, I'm sorry for the late start. We had some technical difficulties here. But I want to say a hearty and pleasant good morning to you. And I want to thank you once again for tuning in and listening and hopefully engaging us during the conduct of this session. Normally we would go for 1 hour, and I will keep it limited to 1 hour. And that means that we will proceed. I will speak for a short while and then we will take questions. So if you have thoughts or questions as we go along, please ask them even while I'm speaking. And my support staff here with me will help to raise the questions, and I will try to answer them for you. My name is Boindradat Tiwari. I'm the Member of Parliament for Caroni Central. I am an opposition Member of Parliament for this constituency and in the House of Representatives, and I represent the United National Congress. And I am engaging you in that capacity. Today, normally at these sessions, I try to focus on solutions to some of the problems in the country, some of the economic problems, some of the issues in education, etc. But today, I want to focus on a more troubling issue, which I think is very much in the consciousness and sensibility and in the psychological wrestling of citizens of this country as we go forward. I think many people have come to the end of the line with Keith Rowley and this particular government. I think most people in their mind feel that they have failed us terribly. They are the worst government that we've had ever in the history of this country, from self-government in 1956 through independence and republicanism to now. That they have failed us in terms of national security. We have lost control of our borders. Although they have 12 ships, they are always docked in Chagaramas and never go out to sea. Our borders are not under the control of the state. We have the murders continuing at a rate and with an intensity now that is quite troubling. You had the murder in a trace in Pinal, in which they divested the husband and wife of their money, but the criminals actually shot and killed the husband in that particular crime. In my own constituency of Caroni Central over the weekend, there were 2 home invasions in which the people were brutalized, and one of the men in his own home actually was so roughed up and battered in the face that he lost some of his teeth. So the crime, the violence, the murders, the loss of control of our national security situation is really one of the sins of this government. Not that I am saying that they started it or that we didn't always have a crime problem, but I have never seen a situation of such. I don't know if you are aware, but our debt is extremely high. We have about $100 billion worth of debt in Trinidad and Tobago. And when you take all the public sector indebtedness, everything for which the government or the state can be held liable, you're talking about something in excess of $150 billion. That is nothing to sneeze at. It means really that we are so indebted that in a situation in which we cannot get the economy to recover, in which we cannot have growth, in which we cannot address the issue of the balance of trade, and in which we cannot address the issue of foreign exchange earnings in a significant way, we really are challenged to repay this level of debt in the near future. The second thing is that the economic situation has basically ground to a halt. An economist friend of mine has described this economy as being in a comatose state. That is to say, the economy has slumped into a coma. And there is very little confidence. I spent some time speaking to people on Thursday and Friday last week, people in the business community, people in the middle class, people in the professional class, and they are all at one on the issue. The country is in a parlous state, that the government has lost control, that they don't know what they are doing, they don't know where they are headed, they do not know what to do, and people are really worried and upset now about the future of the country. So whether you talk about national security and personal security, murders and crime, whether you talk about the economy, whether you talk about the finances of this country, and as far as the finances go, the only spots of light in the country are of foreign exchange, which up to last year was dwindling at the rate of $1.6 billion annually. It probably has slowed down a little bit now because there's a significant suppression of foreign exchange in the official markets, although the black market for foreign exchange rages. And the second thing is that there's the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, of which a significant proportion of that is really the interest that is accruing on that those foreign reserves in the HSF, not any money that the government is putting in, as we are supposed to do when we are doing okay. So all around we have a serious problem, and it is going to be hell when the UNC comes into office to deal with this situation of dwindling foreign exchange, of a challenged HSF, of a high debt ceiling, of a situation in which you have very, very little fiscal space, because you have the expenditure continues to be relatively high, although there has been some fall. The revenue situation is terrible. The exchequer overdraft is close to $40 billion now. That is to say, the overdraft in the exchequer account, the overdraft in the central bank account. And we are really, really in a difficult situation in Trinidad and Tobago, economically, financially, and strategically in terms of a development strategy. But as I have said to you on different occasions, we have solutions and we have ways of doing this and getting the recovery. And I will deal with those from time to time. And the political leader of our party, Mrs. Kamla Prasad Bisesa, will also address those things during the course of her talks from time to time on the Monday night forum, some of her press releases, and also when she engages issues that come up from time to time. So we are going to provide the solutions to you. But today I want to say to you, I want to invite you to our Monday night forum of the United National Congress, which will be held in the constituency of Caroni Central on September 2nd. That's to say next Monday. And Mrs. Bissessa will be here as political leader and leader of the opposition and former Prime Minister to speak. I will also be speaking on that forum, and after Wednesday we will let you know who the other speakers are going to be on the platform. So if you can, please come to the Presal High School at the Couva exit of the Butler Highway. It starts at 6:30 p.m. and we hope to see you there. We will have a very, very nice meeting for you of serious discussion. And today, I want to address something that is very serious. You know, one of our former Prime Ministers, Basil Pandey, and the founding leader of the United National Congress, once said that politics has a morality of its own. And I think most people agree that there is a context for politics in which things can happen and are allowed to happen and are managed within a context that is different in frame to other things that happen and are allowable in other aspects of our life. So that politics has its own dictates, its own context, and that is why he could say provocatively that politics has a morality of its own. Some of you may be too young to know this unless you've read the history, but the older people in the society would know this, that when Dr. Eric Williams founded the PNM, he started mobilizing in the country in 1955, and by 1956 he had formed a party called the People's National Movement. And one of the principal issues of the several issues that he raised as fundamental to that party was morality in public affairs. I want to remind you of that, and I want to let those of you who are younger know that morality in public affairs was one of the founding principles of the People's National Movement, founded by the Right Honorable Eric Williams, a person who most citizens of this country, if not all, regard as the father of our nation, because he presided over this country for 30 years, and he ushered in the era of independence and republicanism in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, some of you would remember, and if you don't know, or if you are too young, I will remind you of it, that in the year 2000, the President of the Republic, Mr. A.N.R. Robinson, who was also a former Prime Minister, used something in the preamble of our Constitution which we can identify as moral and spiritual values in order to make a decision as to whom he would appoint Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. I think that was 2001, sorry. And that issue of moral and spiritual values in the preamble of the Constitution raises the issue of what is the frame and context within which politics is supposed to operate in Trinidad and Tobago. I will not go into the details of that particular decision and the rightness or wrongness of it. All I will do is emphasize the fact that moral and spiritual values are mentioned. This phrase exists in the preamble to the Constitution of Trinidad and And secondly, that it was used as justification by a sitting and presiding president of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago in order to make a decision about who would be the prime minister and therefore which party would govern in Trinidad and Tobago. And I want to therefore raise this issue about politics and politicians and the conduct of politics in Trinidad and Tobago and some of the issues related to it. And the question I want to ask is that even if politics has a morality of its own, are there values that we subscribe to in the society that are important to acknowledge even in the conduct of politics? For instance, the question that most people wrestle with if you want to live a decent life is, how should a good person live? All right, what ought he or she to do? This is a question that was asked in one of the novels written by one of the novelists that I've studied and which I included in my thesis when I wrote about V.S. Naipaul some time ago in 1983. Saul Bellow was a Nobel Prize winner and he wrote many books. And in one of his books, the narrator asked the question, how should a good man live? What ought he to do? And it's a very important ethical and moral question. How do you live a decent life? And I want to ask the question, is a politician, because he is involved in politics, is he or she exempt from that question? Okay? And I think that you will agree with me that even if politics has a morality of its own, a politician cannot be exempt from that question, from asking that fundamental question in the way he or she conducts his business. The second thing that I want to raise with you is that most of us, sometimes we have a question, you know, especially when we're in difficulties or problems, we have a question that we might ask ourselves, which is, what is the purpose of life and what is my purpose as a human being? And in that we look to perhaps spiritual guidance and to God for guidance. And this is an important question. It is a question that some people have described as the 4 o'clock in the morning question. When you get up, you're questioning how you live and why you live and what are you here for? Why am I here? That 4 o'clock in the morning question, what is my purpose in life? And the issue is really, to me, the answer to that question is that you've got to find a way of making meaning in your life. And I want to ask the question whether a politician is exempt from the issue of making meaning in his or her life and making meaning in the lives of the people whom he or she, that politician, is seeking to serve, because you cannot serve unless the people put you there. And the third issue that I want to raise, by the way, on this particular issue, you know, Socrates, the Greek philosopher, has written during his time that the unexamined life is not worth living. And what that means is that we need to reflect on the way we conduct our lives and the way we behave, the way we conduct ourselves in society. And in examining that on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, on an annual basis, many people do this on New Year's Day or Old Year's Night. But what you do is that you try to improve. You set new goals for yourself, you try to improve. And the idea here is that the purpose of human life really is to improve the way you conduct yourselves and to help to improve the lot of the human race. And the third question really is so we examine our lives and we conduct our business, okay? And the final thing that I want to ask is, are politicians exempt from the values of a society that are considered decent and good and honorable in order to have a decent society? And that question is important, because if you do not have honest and honorable and decent members of your society in leadership of your society, how are you going to set the tone of conduct in the society where you can have the higher values of living and of civilization and the conduct of business and social order in your society? How are you going to have these things in your society? So the point I am making is that whether politics has a morality of its own or not, and whether things that are not allowed in the rest of the society are allowed in politics, we must also remember too that our Constitution in its preamble talks to us about moral and spiritual values, and that the issue of morality in public affairs was introduced in the national agenda by Eric Williams in the original founding document of the People's National Movement, Morality in Public Affairs. And these things were important for us. And that the ethical questions that ordinary human beings talk about, how should a good person live? What ought he to do? All right, what is my purpose in life, and how do I make meaning? The politicians in a country, the leaders of a country, are not exempt from that. They are required to ask those questions and to conduct themselves in a certain way. And we are living in a society now where all those virtues and values, all right, have basically been thrown in the dustbin. And that is the reason for the moral fracture in the society. And that is the reason for the disturbance in the society at every level about what is happening in the society. It is not just a political question. It is not just a question of whether the Rowley government is a bad government that has mismanaged national security and has mismanaged the economy and has mismanaged the finances and are running the country to the ground and over a precipice economically. It is also the moral question. And starting in 1956, the moral question was put on the political agenda. And now, in 2019, the moral and ethical questions have come to the fore in the politics of Trinidad and Tobago. I went to a church on Sunday. It was a Pentecostal church, 100 years old. In a couple of years, it's going to be 100 years old. It's about 98 years old now. And there were ministers of government there, including myself. And one of the people who prayed in that church prayed in this way. And it raises, it really, the way that prayer was said really tells us the moral and ethical crisis in which we have found ourselves as a country, the level of despair in the hearts of people, and the yearning for divine intervention to bring hope and rehabilitation and resuscitation to the quality of life and the level of values that exist in our society. And when that person prayed, what that person said was this: "Dear God, we beg you and we beseech you and we ask you to stop the bloodletting in Trinidad and Tobago. So that person was concerned about the continuing spate of murders. That person also said, dear God, we ask you and beg you and beseech you to stop the thieving in Trinidad and Tobago. So that person, speaking for the church, was concerned about the issue of corruption in Trinidad and Tobago. And thirdly, that person pleaded to God that he intervened to restore justice in Trinidad and Tobago, because the situation in the country had become such that no person in the country could be guaranteed justice in Trinidad and Tobago. It was a plaintive cry for divine intervention in the condition of this country. So, reflecting on that, that is what prompted me to address this issue today, because I think that it is in the consciousness of people, and anybody who is a decent person in this society must be concerned if these issues of ethical conduct and morality have now taken the center point of consciousness among the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So I want to close, because I do not want you to be long. I want you to ask questions, and so that I can engage you. I want to close by saying that politicians are not exempt from the positive values in the society. And when people begin to feel that the people in government have violated those values which hold the society together, and to which the society aspires, and to which the better part of the society stands for, it is time to remove that government and to find a way of putting something better, something more exemplary, something that can reach a higher level of ethical standards and a higher level of morality in the conduct of public affairs in Trinidad and Tobago. And I want to say that you must do what you can. The options are very clear in the country, and you must do what you can to influence your political leader, Mrs. Kamala Prasad Bisesa, to take the decisions that are important in our country, to restore not only a government that can bring jobs and recovery and growth and development to Trinidad and Tobago and ultimately prosperity, but a government that can restore a level of ethical practice and conduct and a level of morality in Trinidad and Tobago that Trinidad and Tobago needs in order to move forward with dignity and self-respect. Thank you very much for listening to me.
So good morning, Dr. Tiwari. One of the questions that our viewers have this morning is, how can we strive to increase the competencies of current politicians, and what structure can be put in place to guide the young and upcoming generations who have political aspirations?
Well, I think one important thing is to explain, to understand, to teach the history and the evolution of politics in Trinidad and Tobago, to examine those things that we have actually achieved over time in our 57 years of independent history. On August 31st, we are going to be 57. I think the other thing would be to examine very critically the mistakes that we have made and what has taken us after 57 years to this particular quagmire that we have found ourselves in at 57 years of age in our country. And I think this is a very important thing. Besides the normal skills that you need in politics, I think you need politicians who are educated. I think you need politicians who are knowledgeable. Educated does not mean just certification. It means knowledgeable. People develop themselves. Some of them are rooted in the society, in the community. Some of them do things in the country or in the community. Some of them serve in various ways. And I think education is important. The development of practical skills is important. I think the issue of mentoring is important. But most important of all, in the context of what I'm saying today, examples, good examples of leadership are important. And the mentoring issue is also a very important thing.
Another question that came from one of our viewers is, crime has always been a sore point in the fabric of our society. Given another term in office and not compromising or disclosing details of any crime plans, what approach can be taken to allow citizens to feel socially safe so that they no longer continue to live in self-imposed jails?
Well, the last phrase that was used there, I think, describes the situation in which everybody finds themselves today. Nightlife has virtually ceased in this country, except for those who are involved in nefarious activities. The night economy of Trinidad and Tobago has virtually ceased, except for those who are involved in nefarious activities. And even in the day, people walk about in a condition of fear. Fear is everywhere, and the arbitrariness of the violence and the unexpectedness of it has really put people in a situation where they do not know what to do and how to proceed. There is hardly a person in Trinidad and Tobago who does not have some connection with someone who has been killed, that is to say murdered, or someone whose home has been invaded, or someone who has been somehow oppressed by violence in this society, by thugs and gangsters and other marauders running over the country in a most callous way. And I think that the solution to the situation in the country basically must begin with the control of our borders. This is very important. We have 12 ships here, and it is important to do that. And if we cannot do it alone, we must ask for international help in order to gain control of our borders. The second thing that we must do in gaining control of our borders is not just patrolling the seas and the little inlets of the country, but by organizing customs in such a way that they become an instrument of border control. Customs and immigration must be an instrument of border control. So the first thing is to control our borders. The second thing is to have police deployed with mobility on the streets and highways in their cars or on their motorcycles, to use electronic surveillance in a very strategic way, to tie that in with technology that will allow you citizens to participate in it. And some of that was spoken about last night on the UNC platform at the Monday night forum in Oropouche East. And you also have got to have police on bicycles, and you've got to have police as well on feet, together with other patrols in the communities. And community partnerships need to be developed. In areas that are strongholds of criminal activity and gangsterism, you need a different strategy that will contain mobility of these elements and therefore prevent them from wreaking havoc on the rest of the society while you protect the communities in which they reside. And if you are going to open up the society to a feeling of greater freedom in the society, then you are going to have high levels of protection and visibility of those who are there to protect us from crime in places like the malls, the beaches where people gather on weekends and on public holidays, etc., and on public places everywhere. So the first rule is to control your borders with the ships that we have and with customs and immigration. And I'm not talking about just PRO and Shagaramas and so on. I am talking about a comprehensive approach to this. And then secondly, you have to deploy the police for visibility, and you have to deploy them for presence, and you have to deploy them for mobility. You have to connect them with technology, and you have to connect the citizens with the technological system that will create the conditions for information, application, and action. And then finally, you've got to have particular and peculiar strategies for the gang-infested areas. And you've got to have a control mechanism in terms of presence and visibility for the public spaces that people utilize all the time, so that you can bring down the fear level in the society.
Dr. Tiwari, how can we speak about morals and ethics in politics when parliamentarians enjoy protection through parliamentary privileges and they are ultimately the ones protected under the Constitution?
Well, I'm not sure if that question is right. Parliamentary privilege exists. I mean, you can come and say something in Parliament that might be outrageous, as Keith Rowley did about the Emailgate matter. And if the matter becomes statute barred, there's nothing that you can do about it, as might be the case in this particular situation. But, I mean, if somebody does something as outrageous as Keith Rowley did in this Emailgate matter, and the population cannot hold him to account to Parliament, and you cannot hold him to account in the courts of this country, certainly the people can hold him to account in an election system. And that is where people have to determine whether they are prepared to allow those kinds of things. And the same thing goes for people who violate norms that jar in the sensibility of people. People who belong to political parties have to take a stand on the kind of people who represent them in those political parties. And people outside of political parties have to take a stand as citizens on the kind of people they are willing to support to be in Parliament. And more than that, if there are things that require constitutional reform, then those issues must also be raised by the population so that they can be addressed. It's not wrong for a politician to have parliamentary privilege, because you want freedom of speech and you want that parliament to be a place where people can say anything that is reasonable, and they have the protection of freedom of speech in that parliament. But when people abuse the freedom of speech to the detriment of the future of the society or to the violation of the sensibilities and values of the society, then they must also be held to account.
From recent experiences with public healthcare, without implicating anyone, I suspect that some instances medical professions create lucrative businesses for private hospitals with which they are involved in directing patients to these centers so that they are able to get treatment on which quick time, as opposed to being put on long waiting lists. How can we mitigate and ultimately weed out this practice, which can be described as an indirect form of extortion from patients who are in a state of desperation and vulnerability?
Yes, I have personal experience of what that person is asking. I had a situation many years ago in which someone very close to me had an accident. And when that person had the accident, they had to undergo an operation, and it was important that that operation be done quickly. But it happened very late in the night, maybe 11 p.m. And when we went to the Port of Spain hospital, there was no possibility of doing surgery at that time in the hospital. The whole system was dysfunctional, doctors were not available, support systems to do surgery adequately could not be harnessed. And I had to take that person to a private facility to have the surgery done. Thank God the surgery was done. It was done properly, and the person remained not just alive, but functional, and is able to function and contribute to life and society now. So I know what the person who raised it is talking about. And yes, you do have doctors who exploit the public system for private gain, as in fact ministers do in this government, in which, for instance, private arrangement, private benefit accrues to ministers in this government, taxpayers' money in the pockets of ministers in this government, and it is legitimized by cabinet decision making in Trinidad and Tobago. I don't want to go into particular examples, but that is a fact of life in the current government of Trinidad and Tobago. So my own feeling is that as long as the public health system is dysfunctional and made to be dysfunctional, you are always going to have a situation in which the place of last resort and best opportunity is going to be a private facility where they have control over everything. And to the extent that people are allowed to do that, it will cause a problem. But not everybody does that. And what you need to do is to have a system in which public facilities are functional and effective and efficient, and private facilities and public facilities are integrated through a national health insurance system, so that you basically use the standards of the private facilities now in order to raise the standards and quality of service in the public healthcare system. And you have a national insurance system that allows people to take advantage of the quality of service and the quality of professional care in all of these institutions. So the health system can be salvaged, but you cannot salvage it if you have a public system and a private system competing with each other. You see, this is part of the problem. And in which the professional doctor or medical practitioner is conflicted because of his or her dual roles for the public and the private system, and in which there are no ethical standards and norms that are enforced in order to make sure that the system, the public healthcare system, is efficient, and that officers within the public healthcare system are held to account. And fourthly, the public healthcare system must understand the dilemma of the public health professional who wants to serve citizens and serve the country and serve the healthcare system and have security of tenure in the public system, but who is also in demand in the private healthcare system. So there must be standards and systems established for these things to work efficiently and effectively and accountably. And unless you rationalize the system properly, you're not going to have a solution to this problem. It is not a problem of good doctors and bad doctors only. It is a problem of a dysfunctional system in which the private sector competes with the public sector openly, and in which there is suspicion about the public healthcare system, and in which there is dysfunctionality in the public healthcare system. If you want to get a CT scan in the public healthcare system, you have to wait weeks. If you want to get a surgery in the public health system, you have to wait months, sometimes a year. So this cannot continue. You cannot have a decent system if these things continue.
Dr. Tiwari, one of the next questions that one of our viewers have is, what are your thoughts on the utilization of body cameras for police officers to encourage transparency and how they deal with the general public, and how practical is it in terms of its integration in the police service today?
As a modern police service, if we are serious about dealing with crime, but we are also serious about dealing with instances of police brutality and instances of the abuse of power by those in authority, body cameras are absolutely necessary and they need to be integrated. I will not make any excuse for criminals. If people are involved in gangs, if they are involved in drugs, if they are involved in guns, if they are involved in murders, if they are involved in criminal activity, I think you have to be very tough on them and deal with them. There must be opportunities for rehabilitation and re-education and things like that, and reintegration in the society. But as criminals, you have to deal with them very tough. And I back the police on this, which is that if the police are doing their job, they should be given the backing. But on the other hand, you have rogue police, and you have police who are involved in corrupt activities, sometimes in connection with the gangs. And the only way you can protect the public and keep the system honest is with body cameras.
Dr. Tiwari, how can we equip local government representatives with the tools, resources, and competencies to effectively serve the people who they represent?
Well, you know, first of all, I think you have to make the local government system fairer. The political leader of the UNC has been raising the question of the number of people who are represented by a particular local government. And she has been showing that in certain local governments, the number of people who have to be served is very, very high. The number of communities is very, very high. And the allocations for those local governments are relatively equal, despite of the number of citizens that have to be served. In the Kuva, Tabaki, Talparo local government area, for instance, that corporation, you know, that corporation serves a geographical area. The square mileage of Barbados is like a whole country. And these demographic issues, including the issues of whether it's rural, urban, semi-urban, etc., have to be taken into account in dealing with local government. And more than that, local government really should be given much more power and authority and autonomy with the requisite accountability mechanisms to make sure that these do not end up being runaway local government entities with tin god chairmen and mayors, etc., who basically abuse their power over a smaller area. So the issue of resource allocation and the deployment of resources should be linked to the size of the population, the number of communities, and the relative and the assessment of the relative economic and social condition of those communities, be they rural, semi-urban, or urban. And secondly, there has to be the devolution of powers and decentralized authority to the extent that they can be efficient and effective. And more than that, there has to be accountability to ensure that people do not run away with the powers that they have. So there is need for serious local government reform in Trinidad and Tobago, but the reform must not be a kind of reform that gives lip service to reform and basically adds a few responsibilities to local government, which is what I think the PLM is trying to do. The Rowley government promised comprehensive local government reform, and it is not doing it. And my own feeling is that you do need very serious local government reform in which decentralization, devolution of power, and accountability are the critical factors. In the Planning and Facilitation of Development Bill that I passed in Parliament in 2014, for instance, that bill calls for significant devolution of power for planning approval to the local government authorities. But I think that that has now been rolled back by this particular government, and I don't know what is going to happen with it. But that was a way of moving to devolution, taking one item that was a sore point and then spreading the devolution to other areas that would make a difference in the life of citizens. Remember, the whole purpose of government, whether local government or central government, is to provide goods and services to the people and make sure that the things that matter to them are taken care of through the government services. There are things that private citizens have to do for themselves, and there are things, public goods, that government has to offer. And we have to make it clear what are the things that government is responsible for and that they will deliver without fail, and what are the things that people are responsible for, and they must organize their own business to do that.
So this will be the last question, keeping in time with the
1 hour limit.
So the young and upcoming generation are ultimately the future of our nation, and in many instances they are often streamlined in the school system and often ignored in any other regard. How can we move away from this and still shift to a more diverse and holistic method of poor youth development?
Well, there is no reason why leadership talent could not be nurtured in the primary school, why confidence could not be built in the primary school, why public speaking talent could not be honed in the primary school, why collaborative projects could not be done in the primary school, and that would help a lot in creating a different kind of student. You know, someone sent me a thing yesterday where in the Philippines, in order for a child to graduate and a young person to graduate at any level of schooling, they are required to plant 10 trees, which adds to the question of responsibility, and passing on of responsibility is a very important thing in the schooling framework and also for development of the society. Okay, so that can be done at primary school. These things can be enhanced in the secondary school, and the curriculum needs to be changed. There needs to be not only a combination of academic and technical, vocational, and also recreational, and also involving the arts in the secondary school system. But it's also important to do things that help the secondary school system to orient itself and its students towards things like sustainable development, entrepreneurship, productivity, competitiveness, innovation, invention, critical thinking, and creative thinking. Introduce them to elements of design, things like that. All of these things need to be done in the secondary school. And teamwork is something that needs to be built in the secondary school. And then the tertiary education system needs to pick up from there, and in addition to developing professionals and certificated people with degrees. The curriculum also needs to be transformed for the world that we are living in which we are going to be challenged by climate change, in which we are going to have to move away from fossil fuels into greener industries, in which we need entrepreneurs, in which our economy has to be more competitive, in which we need leadership, in which ethics matters, in which people must understand the issues of decision making and the critical thinking that goes into decision making that makes a difference. All of these things need to be added to the curriculum. So the issue of bringing youth into the process is not simply a question of getting youth involved in politics or society, but creating the environment in a school in which a school is more than going to the classroom and learning something from a book or from a computer or from the teacher talking in front of you. Okay? So if the whole ethos of the classroom and the school needs to change, and more than that, in a country in which you have about 350,000 students people between 16 and 30, and you have another 300,000 up to the age of 16, we better pay attention to our youth and try to figure out what they are thinking and doing. And because the society at the end of the day is going to belong to them. And if we do not do the things to involve them, one of these days they are going to rise up and say, to hell with it, and we are going to take it away from you. We are just fed up.
Just a supplementary question to the last point. How can we address the growing number of youths that are psychologically affected, misunderstood, and ignored in our country today?
Well, there are lots of social and psychological problems in the society. Our society has become largely dysfunctional. All these gangs and so on. I mean, the government talks about 211 gang leaders. That means you have at least 211 gangs. Mm-hmm. Yeah? You talk about 2,500 gang members. Where these gang members and these gang leaders come from? Not from the secondary school system. You know? So that's part of the problem. It means that the school system is at certain levels dysfunctional. I raised that last week when I spoke, saying that it caters for at best about 50% of the school-age population in the secondary school system. But we have another problem. More than that, if families are dysfunctional and homes are dysfunctional, then you are bound to have psychological problems. Okay, what are the problems in the home? You have single mothers. You have single mothers with 3 and 4 children by 3 and 4 different fathers. I mean, we should not condone these things as a reality of life. We should try to begin to address these things to help young women. In 2004, the World Bank did a study in which they talked about youth at risk. I brought that study to the attention of the then Minister of Education. I was at the University of the West Indies at the time. And nothing was done about it. I mean, we have all those problems that we have now. But one of the things in that study is that the study said that sexual initiation of the female is at the youngest age in the Caribbean, in the world. In other words, older men were sexually initiating very young girls at the lowest age in the world. This was lower than sub-Saharan Africa. Now, if you don't want to see that as a crisis and deal with it, and you want to take a hands-off attitude that it's okay for that to happen, I don't see how you're going to solve a problem. You have to solve that problem. So that begins to address the issue of family, which cannot be stable. It then creates dysfunctionality in the family. If you have dysfunctional families, you're bound to have a psychological disturbance. It is going to transfer into the school system. If you don't have effective counseling measures, it's going to be a problem. If the parents do not engage the teachers in the development of the school, remember they are only there for part of the time and they go back to the whole environment after, it's going to be a problem. More than that, there are other problems as well. I mean, you're dealing with a different kind of child now. In homes that are better off, children are on their technological devices all the time, whether it is iPad, whether it is your phone, all right, whether it is some kind of games that they are playing on their own. Now you can, with the technology, play games with other friends. And these things become more enticing and addictive and therefore dissonant in relation to classroom study. And when you have the old formula for teaching in the classroom, where you have a teacher in front of the class droning all the time and buffing up the students and that kind of thing, I mean, you are creating dissonance in the life of the student. And the student who has a choice between the joy of dealing with the technology and engaging in friends on the technology and having at the same time company as well as aloneness, and going into this classroom and having a teacher drone at him and perhaps not pay the attention that they need to. And this is especially true of boys. The girls are, for whatever reason, I don't know whether it is genetics, I don't know if it is the way the brain is structured or what, but the boys have a more difficult time with that. And if the classroom arrangement is not changing and the technology is advancing at a pace that outstrips the imagination and the capacity to cope, you're bound to have a dysfunctionality in the society, and we need to take those things into account. We need to bring people who know about these things to zone in on the particular problem, to zone in on the schools that are having those problems, to zone in on the communities that are having those problems, and to deal with the general youth population in a way that makes them whole and wholesome and productive and ambitious, so that they can make a contribution to the world rather than to become a liability. Okay, that's it. Do you have any more questions? Well, we thank you for your questions. I thank you for engaging me this hour. Again, my apologies for starting late. Please join me as your Member of Parliament for Caroni Central, even if you do not live in my constituency, but I'm appealing especially to people in Caroni Central to come out to the Monday night forum at the Presal High School in Couva. That's just off the Couva exit of the Butler Highway, and it's on Monday at 6:30 p.m. Please be sure and be there. We would like you to be there and to participate. The political leader of the UNC will be our main speaker, the feature address, Mrs. Kamala Prasad Bisesa, and I'm sure that she'll have something important to say to you, and I will speak, and other members of the UNC will also speak. Please come. Monday, the 2nd of September, 6:30 p.m., Presal High School. Please be there. Monday night forum. Thank you very much.